In the 1970s, the US Navy would be elevated to a new standard. The arrival of the first Alpha model F-14 Tomcats in September 1974 and their first deployment to Vietnam with VF-1 and VF-2 signaled the beginning of a new era in air combat. Roughly coinciding with the arrival of the F-15 and F-16 for the US Air Force, the Tomcat would become an indispensable asset for the Navy until its eventual retirement in 2006. Today, the public view the F-14 as a cool-looking but outdated relic, its legacy kept alive only by films and its limited use by Iran. However, there were plans to modernize the F-14, which may have allowed it to remain in service like the Eagle or Viper. The 1970s marked a turning point in air combat. Both the United States and the Soviet Union exploited the Vietnam War to advance the development of new aircraft for various roles. For the US, Australia, and other allied countries directly involved in the conflict, the lessons learned were written in blood. In the domain of air combat, it was clear, as it had been since the war in the Pacific, that within visual range engagement and dogfighting has always been risky business, regardless of what technology the pilot was strapped into. The future would involve high-powered radars, radar-guided missiles, and beyond visual range engagement. Experiments in Vietnam, like the F-4 combat tree system, demonstrated the significant advantage that BVR engagements provided the aggressors. The F-14 Tomcat was an important platform in this evolution of aerial warfare. First flying in December 1970, several years before the F-16, F-15, and MiG-29, the Tomcat was the first fourth-generation fighter. The Alpha model would enter service in 1974. Following in the footsteps of the F-111 and MiG-23, the Tomcat would employ variable geometry wings, allowing it to adapt to high and low-speed situations. The design was an aesthetically pleasing profile, and now somewhat iconic of the era. Overall, the Tomcat's airframe was clearly similar to the F-111, but more advanced. Both the pilot and WSO had office spaces similar to those found in the F-4, surrounded by panels accommodating a variety of predominantly analog technology, albeit with newer-looking scopes. Technologically, it was a significant advancement, featuring a far more powerful radar and, crucially, effective beyond visual range capabilities. It would not be long before other significant fourth-generation designs emerged, all of them rather similar to one another, yet distinctly different from the Tomcat. The first was the F-15 Eagle. The F-15 was regarded by the US Air Force as the most promising design for longevity, more than any previous designs. Although the airframe looked similar to the MiG-25 Foxbat, in practice the Eagle's design allowed it incredible agility, despite its large size. The F-15, equipped with advanced radar, a combination of digital and analog technology, and a substantial air-to-air payload, demonstrated near invincibility in simulated engagements with rival aircraft, only being surpassed in specific high-intensity situations. Furthermore, all of these systems were integrated into a rather manageable single-seat configuration. The Tomcat and Eagle would stand in stark contrast to the inexpensive F-5s and other aggressor aircraft during the air combat evaluation and the air intercept missile evaluation testing in the mid-1970s. The outcome demonstrated that the Tomcat and Eagle were proficient in their respective functions, yet despite their dominance, in specific situations could still be overwhelmed by smaller, cheaper aircraft. Therefore, it was necessary to implement a high-low dynamic in aircraft purchase. For the Air Force, the cheap choice would be the F-16, which features a distinctive tailed delta airframe that many considered risky, yet potentially future-proof if appropriately adapted. For the Navy, the economical choice was the F-18, subsequently designated as the FA-18. This aircraft featured a distinctive airframe and, similar to the Viper and Eagle, seemed to incorporate significantly advanced internal and external technologies. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, the Soviets developed their own fourth-generation designs, notably the Flanker family of aircraft and the MiG-29 Fulcrum. Both aircraft were influenced in their airframe design by the MiG-25 and primarily the Eagle. According to several Russian designers, the airframe of the Eagle and Flanker was regarded as nearly flawless, superior to any conventional delta, variable geometry, or diamond configuration. Thus, from the introduction of the F-15 onwards, the Tomcat represented a highly capable but outwardly older airframe. Initially, this was not a concern. Nevertheless, over time, it evolved into a contentious problem among decision-makers regarding budgeting, servicing, and future-proofing. In the mid-1970s, both the F-15 and F-14 were offered to certain clients, specifically Israel and Iran, who subsequently achieved the majority of aerial victories with each aircraft. Both countries took different approaches. The Shah of Iran was an aviation enthusiast, and his son would later become a military pilot. During a visit, the F-15 and F-14 were sequentially flown in a fly-off for the Shah and his advisors. They appreciated both, but the Shah favored the F-14. Significantly, the Iranians wanted the long-range capabilities of the aircraft's primary weapon, the AIM-54 Phoenix, along with its radar performance and its capacity to swiftly intercept Soviet MiG-25s and supersonic bombers. For the Iranians, this consideration proved invaluable when the Iran-Iraq War broke out. The F-14's interception capabilities and the range of the Phoenix missile enabled them to swiftly deter supersonic Tu-22s, some equipped with chemical weapons, from entering Iranian airspace. At the end of the day, the Iranian procurement had paid off. For the Israelis, it was a different story. In 1974, Israeli Air Force pilot Amnon Arad led an evaluation of the new Tomcat. His team consisted of pilots from different aircraft, some from Phantoms, some from Mirages, and some working on the Kefir project. Unlike the Iranians, the Israelis were basing their decision-making on lessons learned during the Yom Kippur War, which the Israelis had almost catastrophically lost. With this experience, the Israeli team noted that the F-14 was very good, but couldn't be flown hard without risk of engine trouble. In stark contrast to the Iranians, they also noted that they had little use for the powerful ANAWG-9 radar, nor the Phoenix missile or twin-seat setup. They requested their own fly-off to evaluate the designs but were denied. Nevertheless, they were able to fly and evaluate each aircraft individually. Several Israeli pilots, namely Asaf Ben-Nun and Israel Baharav, were given the opportunity to fly a simulated fight using the F-14 and A-4 Skyhawk. Baharav flew first in an A-4 and was able to defeat the Navy demo team in their F-14, and he subsequently lost faith in the design. Then Ben-Nun flew the F-14 with an instructor, facing off against Israeli Air Force evaluation lead Amnon Arad in an A-4. During the flight, Ben-Nun recalls that the F-14 shuddered violently during high angle of attack turns, couldn't produce the thrust he expected, and was, as he put it, complex and not user-friendly. In the end, he was disappointed that he didn't feel he had any advantage over the A-4 during the fight. The Israelis believed that the F-15 was a better all-round aircraft, lending itself to faster adaptation in unpredictable scenarios. Notably, they liked the bubble canopy over the older, far more cluttered canopy of the Tomcat. They also preferred the Eagle's balanced approach to both beyond and within visual range combat. A fly-off between the F-15 and both an F-4 and A-4 sold the design once and for all to the evaluation team. Baharav recalls looking on in amazement as the F-15 outperformed the nimble Skyhawk and powerful Phantom at all speeds, never falling into a compromised position during the fight. Thus, the F-15 was chosen for the Israeli Air Force. Significantly, in both decisions to purchase these aircraft, the F-14 distinguished itself in one prominent aspect: cost. The Tomcat has always been a notably expensive aircraft since its conception. The original, rather clunky engines, variable geometry wings, and complex assembly necessitated periodic repairs of components. It was costly to operate, costly to maintain, and, in certain respects, seen as lacking the durability of the F-15. The procurement of the Tomcat would incur costs exceeding 30% more, with operational expenses around one-third higher than those of the Eagle. From its inception, the Tomcat was considered as costly and arguably less innovative than its principal competitor in the Air Force. The remedy for the Tomcat, if there was one, would be in upgrades. In the late 1980s, the first such upgrade would occur. Referred to as the F-14A+, the aircraft would receive some improved internals, including the ALR-67 radar homing and warning system, and, to the relief of the pilots, the TF-30 engines were stripped and replaced with the far more reliable General Electric F-110-400 engines. Beginning in 1987, 43 aircraft would be converted to this standard, while 38 new airframes would be produced. In 1991, they would be renamed F-14 Bravo. This upgrade was a game-changer in terms of longevity and reliability. However, further improvements were needed. Budget constraints limited the project temporarily, but designers and pilots alike desired to replace the old vertical display indicator group, or VDIG, with some new type of multifunction display, like those being delivered in new Charlie model Vipers and Eagles. The cockpit display issue had emerged as a primary disadvantage for the Tomcat in air-to-air combat within this rapidly evolving landscape. For those assigned to fly the Bravo, the upgrade must be postponed, yet designers realized the necessity for more extensive enhancements. Thus, in 1991, deliveries of a promising new platform would begin. The F-14 Delta would be the most advanced Tomcat to date, featuring the new General Electric F-110 engines, a new ANAPG-71 radar, a modernized glass cockpit, an infrared search and track system, and a variety of other technical improvements. The Delta was far superior to either of its two predecessors. 38 new aircraft would be delivered, and a further 18 Alphas would be upgraded under the designation F-14DR for rebuild. Now everything had changed. The Tomcat's true potential had been unleashed like never before. In sharp contrast to the circumstances a few years prior, the aircraft was now significantly more dependable, exhibiting improved subsonic thrust response. It had lowered operating costs, more streamlined maintenance, better BVR capability and, thanks to the F-110s, better dogfighting ability. For the pilot and WSO, the assortment of glass displays streamlined all tasks, from data entry to radar use. Thus, the Delta was referred to as the Super Tomcat and, for the time being, recognized as a modernized design. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, various minor enhancements were implemented on existing airframes. The Bravo models would receive considerable airframe overhauls aimed at extending service life, and soon thereafter receive what is today known as the Sparrowhawk upgrade. In pursuit of the Delta standard, most Bravo models in operation were upgraded with new internal systems, particularly a new head-up display and modular mission display processor. The Sparrowhawk upgrade was so successful that the Bravo head-up display was deemed superior to the Deltas. In other words, broadly the Tomcat was rapidly improving, seeing action in the Middle East, and by this point, still further upgrade plans were in the works. Since its inception, Grumman anticipated an upgrade pathway for the Tomcat. However, several constraints left this pathway unrealized. For instance, the official Bravo and Charlie variations were planned from the beginning, but these were never built, and the B model that did emerge was a budget-friendly compromise. Yet hope now rested on an upgrade to the Super Tomcat. Several proposals existed, all of which would use the F-14 as a platform for further modifications. Up until 1991, the plan had been to phase out the F-14 with the Navy Advanced Tactical Fighter project. The base model Delta was to be the definitive Tomcat, which would operate for a time, then hand over responsibilities to its replacement. However, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Navy's budget was reduced and plans changed. However, there was no solid replacement plan. The F-14 was expected to stay in service until a succession plan could be established. This meant the base model Delta would now require unplanned upgrades to stay current. Yet at the same time, there was now less budget for upgrades, and political opposition against the Tomcat, mounted by Dick Cheney, made this even worse. Cheney blocked the proposed 155 Super Tomcat fleet, limiting production to 37 new airframes and 18 rebuilt Alpha airframes. Despite the seemingly counterintuitive political decision, something had to be done until a clear succession path was established. So, work began on the upgrade program toward the Super Tomcat. Grumman rightly noted that AMRAAM integration would be essential, and a broader multi-role upgrade known as Quick Strike was also drawn up to answer the Navy's growing need for better multi-role abilities. However, due to budget constraints, the Navy reluctantly told designers to refocus their attention, for the time being at least, on integrating Lantern, the low-altitude navigation and targeting infrared for night pod system, which in hindsight was a good move. The modernization of the F-14 would broadly be referred to as the Super Tomcat for the 21st century, or ST-21, and would encompass a variety of smaller programs. The ST-21 proved a promising venture. Featuring new engines, an upgraded airframe and new internals, it would modernize the Tomcat like never before. Stripping out old unnecessary tech, a variety of newer cameras and sensors would be installed, including a new forward-looking infrared system. The new APG-71 radar would be installed, and a new flight computer. Inside, it would feature a modern-looking all-glass cockpit, with a new head-up display with imagery projection, much like the F-15E Lantern. A more advanced proposal, the ASF-21, would build an even more powerful aircraft using the same airframe as a starting point. It would feature a variety of external upgrades, including further modifications to the airframe, newer engines, and perhaps some form of thrust vectoring. Internally, the extent to which the designers wished to change the layout remains unclear, although it is known that it would have featured nuclear weapons capabilities, more pylons, an AESA radar, and a forward air controller master mode of some sort. Both proposals would lean on the faster and more reliable General Electric F-110 engines. Such engines could provide supercruise, with some sources claiming a Mach 1.3 cruise at altitude. In terms of agility, the aircraft would have had even better high angle of attack performance at lower speeds. Finally, Grumman designers proposed their ultimate Super Tomcat. Referred to as the Advanced Strike Fighter, or ASF-14, it would have been essentially a completely new aircraft, save for using the same airframe as a basis. It would integrate seemingly every upgrade proposed for the ST and AST-21 concepts, as well as much more. Externally, it would have thicker wings allowing for more fuel storage and altered aerodynamic performance. Carbon fiber would lighten the airframe, and several hydraulic and electrical systems would be replaced by modern alternatives. This aircraft would have larger fuel stores, more weapon stores, better all-around performance, and still come in lighter than the legacy Tomcat variants. Internally, it would be completely different from its F-14 predecessors, perhaps rebuilt from the ground up. Old systems would be replaced by more reliable modular systems, and likely an all-glass cockpit, an improved head-up display from the ST-21, and probably other improvements, such as integrating the AST-21's AESA radar. If any of these proposals were realized, they would have likely outmatched all competition in terms of range, speed, and power. It would have had better agility and good multi-role performance while retaining or improving the Tomcat's already famed air-to-air abilities. The sole deficiencies of these proposals appeared to be in stealth and cost. It was in a context of ever-shifting expectations that from the mid-1990s onward, it seemed the Tomcat would fall out of favor in some way or other. In 1993, Dick Cheney advocated for the initiation of the Advanced Attack Fighter Program, AFX. This would serve as the spiritual successor to the Navy Advanced Tactical Fighter Project, aiming to provide an appropriate replacement for the Tomcat. Meanwhile, the Navy determined that an interim aircraft was essential. Hence, it opted to acquire new Echo and Foxtrot model Super Hornets, which represented less formidable acquisitions than the F-14, while still being highly capable. Cheney would strike down the Tomcat program shortly after axing the AFX program, calling the F-14D 1960s technology and a jobs project, which was partially true, with over 80,000 jobs relying upon the Tomcat. Finally, after several years of disagreements, Cheney cancelled the Super Tomcat. This directly led to economic instability for Grumman, resulting in the merge with Northrop in 1994. While smaller upgrades, such as Sparrowhawk for the Bravo, would occur later, as well as the Rover 3 package and improved Lantern integration for certain deltas, the powerful upgrade programs originally envisioned would not happen. Thus, the Tomcat came to an end. Throughout its life, depending on who one asks, the Super Tomcat would have been on par with the latest blocks of 4th-gen fighters. During its operational existence, the primary drawbacks encountered by the Tomcat were its reliability and expense. Nonetheless, contrary to claims made by commentators over the years, this was not inherently a deal-breaker. It merely indicated that additional effort was required for the platform. Had sufficient effort been invested, the Tomcat, through upgrade initiatives, may have emerged as the most formidable fighter in the sky. If the F-14D had received the proposed upgrades, be it the standard ST-21 systems or the more ambitious ASF-14, there is no telling just how much better it could have become. Not only would the aircraft have been even more capable in its intended air-to-air roles, but the integration of better air-to-ground tech would have opened up more possibilities for the design in modern warfare. At the end of the day, decision-makers in the Navy understood that the Super Hornet was a good cost-effective choice, proven from the outset to be a modest but reliable platform with existing integration of newer technologies. However, it remains a matter of debate as to just what the Tomcat could have achieved if these upgrade programs were greenlit. It could have been flying today, and not just as a legacy platform, but as a deadly rival to anything else in the air.